Loading.
All right, good morning, Labor, Health, and Social Service Committee. Welcome to Wednesday. I'm glad you all got in by 8 o'clock. Roads were not superbly enjoyable this morning. Welcome, Marilyn, if you'd call the roll.
Yes. Good morning. Representative Chadwick. Representative Clouston. Here. Representative Hornock.
Here.
Representative O'Hearn.
Here. Here.
Representative Penn.
Here.
Representative Trujillo.
Here.
Representative Ward.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here. Everyone's accounted for. Committee, you'll remember we're on House Bill 19, the State Indian Child Welfare Act Task Force. I'm pleased to welcome back Vice Chairman Larson, who's joining us this morning from Tribal. Floor is yours, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Good morning. It really is nice to be here with you. And, what this bill does is will be less extensive for you, is what I try to explain why we are recommending doing a task force. But this puts together a task force, and if you look on page 3, starting from excuse me, from line 17 to 18, we put this task force together to develop legislative recommendations to incorporate the protections of the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978 into state law, and then make these recommendations, if any, back to the Joint Tribal Relations Committee by July of 2024. The first couple of pages really just tell you who the members of this task force would be. Private attorneys, because of their action, people from representatives from both the Eastern Shoshone Tribe and the Northern Arapaho Tribe, members of the House and Senate. So the reason for this is to just help you a little bit on what the Indian Child Welfare Act, or we refer to it as ICWA, really means. Prior to the passage of ICWA in 1978, really approximately 80% of Indian families living on reservations lost at least one child to foster care system. And the state child welfare agencies were often ignorant or indifferent to insensitive to cultural differences. When they removed them, it was usually forcibly, mostly intact Native American families with extended family networks, and placed them predominantly in non-Native homes, which had no relation to Native cultures, and in some cases, the Bureau of Indian Affairs even paid the states to remove the Native American children and to place them in non-Native families or religious groups. So when the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed, it's a federal law that seeks to keep Indian children with Indian families. It was passed because of this compelling evidence of the high number of Indian children that were being removed from their families by public and private agencies. An underlying premise of ICWA is that the Indian tribes have sovereign rights and legal powers with respect to Indian children, and have a vital legal role to play in determining whether Indian children should be separated from their families. So what ICWA does is it says that the tribes have the jurisdiction of children on the reservation, and concurrent jurisdiction with them when they are in outside the reservation and in a court. So for example, if there were an Indian child who was of a tribe from, pick the state, Minnesota, and his family was living here in Cheyenne, not on a reservation, and there was a consideration on child custody proceedings that went to district court, then the district court would be required to notify that child's tribe in Minnesota and get recommendations on where that child should be placed. Without that, typically the district court judge and Department of Family Services would place that child somewhere in, I would assume, in the Cheyenne region with the foster care family, with ICWA, that child may go back and be under the jurisdiction of that tribal court and be placed with an extended tribal family or in that cultural network there. And so it increases the ability for the tribes to maintain the cultural sensitivity that exists within each respective tribe. Now, in Wyoming, where we have one reservation with two tribes living, the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribe, they have, by Congress has allowed them to have their own tribal law and order code. And so within the boundaries of the Winder Reservation, any of those child custody proceedings go to tribal court, and that tribal court judge places them. We even have a more unique situation in Fremont and Hot Springs County that is really kind of a great example of the intent of ICWA, because each tribe has, because they are a sovereign, meaning that they are their own governmental agency by virtue of their treaty, that they're a sovereign government within our government, so they get to have their own self-determination, that they have their own agencies, and one of those agencies is Department of Family Services. Eastern Shoshone Tribe has Eastern Shoshone Tribe and Department of Family Services, same with Northern Arapaho Tribe. They have their own. Those children are tribal members, but they're also citizens of the state. And Wyoming is a little unique in that we help provide some of the funding for child protective services to those respective Department of Family Services and allow them to govern that. But as part of that, when, if there were a family enrolled in either one of those tribes living in my community in Lander, which is off the reservation, borders the reservation, and there is a child custody hearing, we have an agreement with the tribes that respective Department of Family Services from the tribe would then come and intervene, and those children would automatically go to tribal court, which is the intent of ICWA to begin with. If it's, and I try not to get into weeds too much here, but if, it depends on the tribe that they belong to. So the challenge here is with ICWA, the reason all of this is coming up is ICWA does a couple of things that's a little unique. The child custody proceedings are generally under the jurisdiction of the state. And so this federal law says, well, state, yes, but for Indian children, you have to comply with these federal requirements. And that's always been a little bit challenged by the states to say, you shouldn't do this to us. The other part of that is, as I talk about sovereigns, that each tribe for Wyoming, each of those tribes are sovereign entities. That's a political class, okay, and that's an important legal definition. They're a political class more than race, meaning Native American, and they're having this ability to determine how their child protective proceedings move forward is argued by some that we are given preferential racial treatment to Native Americans because it's not a political class. The other side of that argument says, no, they're a political class. And so if this child that we talked about from Minnesota is in Cheyenne, you're giving them racial preference rather than, in the other side of that argument is no, that's a political class, and their sovereign has a right to participate in what happens to that child. Those are really kind of the issues of this Supreme Court case, where that is Bracken v. Holland. Holland is Secretary Holland, the Department of Interior, where the Bureau of Indian Affairs lies, and it goes back to a family who was wanting to adopt. They were a non-Native American family that had some children under their foster care. They adopted one and wanted to adopt a sister, and were not able to because the ICWA, the court, the tribe says, no, we want this child to go someplace else. So they says, well, that's not fair. And so that's pushed a court case that went to district court, and then it has moved up, and the Supreme Court has now decided to hear that case, and it'll be decided in June. The concern that Tribal Relations Committee has is that ICWA has been the foundation and oversight of child custody hearings for Native Americans, and has really brought the pendulum from over here where it was when you had placements and Indian schools that our Native American kids went to, and it brought it back here to where the tribes had a little more, and that pendulum swung a little bit. The concern is that if we take away from ICWA, that we can swing back this way, with states not really, a lot of states not really understanding the impacts of their decisions on child custody hearings with Native American people. And so if that's overturned, what should we in Wyoming then do? Should we adopt the provisions of ICWA as it lies in federal regulation into our state statutes? And that's a bill that's being considered now as kind of right now, as we'll put all of federal ICWA into our state statutes. Even if that passes, there's some nuances in ICWA that respective states need to adjust per their state's needs. And to have this task force, then we could look at this whole conversation and say, what would we recommend the state do to adopt appropriate statutes regarding the Indian Child Welfare Act? Currently, as ICWA, one of the nice things about Wyoming is we just comply with the federal law, and we do that. Other states have adopted state amendments to the federal law, and it, for the most part, has been problematic. The state says, no, you can't tell us to do this, and so we're going to deviate from that a little bit, and they find themselves in a constant state of lawsuits. We've not had that problem. But if ICWA goes away federally, then how should we respond? So, Mr. Chairman, I hope to some degree that has made sense, but so that's the intent of this task force, is to address then how the state would handle ICWA if it were overturned. Questions?
Questions for Representative Larson? Representative O'Hearn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see funding out for 2 years. Can the task force fix everything in 2 years? Or if we just follow federal law like we have been, what's the point of the task force?
Representative Larson.
So if, and that is a great question. So if the court upholds ICWA and nothing changes, it's still probably appropriate to look at the nuances within the federal law that need to be adjusted. In tribal relations, we've had the respective tribes approach us a couple of times and said, we really need to tweak ICWA just a little bit, but we've complied with the federal law. So I think re-examining ICWA's federal regulations to make appropriate, and can't underline appropriate enough, appropriate state amendments to enhance or solidify the intent of ICWA is an important thing to do.
So Chairman or Vice Chairman Larson, we have tribal relations now. There's 3 members from each body on it. I guess, can you give me the justification of why you need something above and beyond, why the Tribal Relations Committee can't do this, I guess, internal, in-house with the resources and the members you currently have, and you need a separate task force? Well,
it's Mr. Chairman, as you're well aware, and new members, we can call on, the chairman's correct. we could, in our interim, over a couple of years, try to engage with various stakeholders to put together some recommendations. A task force is a temporary thing, and so a subcommittee would be all legislators, okay? A task force lets us extend out past legislative model to bring in, as you see here, attorneys who practice and understand the implications of how the Child Welfare Act works now, the judicial system, because they have to oversee bringing these children into district court and then the interaction between tribe and district courts. I think it's important to have representation from each of the tribes that we have here and have those individuals appointed with an identified goal and mission and time frame to do that.
Okay, further questions, Representative Ward?
I have a similar question. So in the appropriations, it's 40,000, but it's 21,000 from the staff, from the House, I presume. So the additional, beyond that 21,000, that's for attorneys?
No, that would be for the.
Representative Larson.
And
Go ahead and
thank you for jerking
Sorry,
on my collar, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Representative Ward, no, that's for reimbursement for the legislators who would be attending these meetings, and then staff for the tribal relations staff to staff it.
Maybe Representative Larson, I'm happy to explain. The way we do appropriations on task forces is a separate appropriation for legislators for their per diem
Yes.
salary. And then we actually have to appropriate money to any of the private members, in this case, the governor selects. And so we would have two appropriations in the bill, and that's historic practice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Are there other questions right now? Yep, Representative Hornut, and then we'll go to Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been operating under this since 1978. And is there any, right now the state then abides by the federal laws? Okay, thanks, just to clarify that.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, if we're looking at moving the direction from the federal level to the state level, and in your discussion, you mentioned how the tribal DFS gets involved and is notified, and then they help make determinations on where these children go. Why are we not just giving the control to the tribal DFS, and why are we choosing to go with the state, knowing that the tribes want their sovereignty, they want their control? Can we just give them the control?
Representative Larson?
That is really good question, and because Wyoming's just a little unique, we basically have done that on the reservation. Where ICWA in its truest sense is, how do we deal with those Indian child placements that originate off the reservation? Okay, so we give them, because they have their own tribal law and order code and they have their own Department of Family Services within the confines of the reservation, right on, they're moving. And this would just codify that. But for the rest of the state, when an Indian child would come into a court system, how do we handle that?
And that's because, as I'm sure the Department of Family Services will testify, when they come into DFS custody, it depends on the county.
That's correct.
And I think many of you who were here are well aware that I had this exact situation over a year, 2 years ago, and very familiar with ICWA and the changes needed. Other questions? Representative Harden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I have adopted an Indian child and he's been in my custody, or she, for 15 years, and she gets in a traffic accident or something like that, or worse, obviously, I have no say in what happens to that child if ICWA comes in and says she goes back to Minnesota?
No,
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I think the key word that you used in, if I understood correctly, is you says you have adopted. That has taken place. That's a legal action that now you have, that child is your adopted child. And so the ICWA proceedings wouldn't work for this. what ICWA oftentimes does is prior to the adoption, if you were attempting to adopt a Native American child, ICWA will come into play on that, and the tribes will have a say on whether that child can be adopted by you or not.
All right, further questions? He's not going too far, I'm sure, but go ahead, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned the difference between race and political class and sovereignty. So are we talking about when we're discussing ICWA and when the tribes get involved, are we talking about any Native American child of that race, or are we talking about children who are a member of a tribe?
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
And again, a great question, and that's the argument before the Supreme Court. ICWA, as it was rolled out by federal law, acknowledges them as a political entity. The argument from those states challenging that says, we don't think that's right. We think that this is race. And so that's really kind of part of the issue that the Supreme Court is considering.
Yeah, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the time frame on that Supreme Court case?
June, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, June, I'm stacking up a few extra Mr. Chairmans here in case I forget.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, what was the lower court's ruling?
I think I have that, Mr. Chairman. It went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that brought that back. It started in a Texas district court, U.S. District Court in Fort Worth. The Fifth District Court of Appeals reversed the district court opinion and is a violation of the 10th Amendment. And then the Supreme Court, and and then the Supreme Court decided to hear that case with a majority of one. Gorsuch voted and is it 5-4? Is there 9 on there? So it's a 5-4 decision to hear the case. Gorsuch, who came out of the 10th, has a long history of Indian issues and has been very supportive of over his course of history on protecting tribal rights, and he sided with that.
And Vice Chairman Larson, while we're considering the bill, if you would start thinking about what happens if the Supreme Court, doesn't overturn anything, do we even need a task force at that point? And would this bill then not go into effect? Would you hold it? Can I put some language in the bill at that time? If you already have it, let me know.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and I think we had that question already, which was what if nothing happens? And again, to point out, there have been a number of requests from the tribes to say there are some anomalies and gaps in the federal that could be strengthened on the House side or on the state side, and to have a task force to look at those and identify them and determine if we want to adopt them into state statute is still a worthy exercise to have.
Okay. We'll call you back up in a sec. Ms. Schmidt, DFS is here, and I just figure you want to testify, or even if you don't, we want to hear from you. Welcome to the front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt. I'm the director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. And we would be one of the appointed agencies that would sit on this task force. But I think the vice chairman has covered really ICWA and the purpose of the task force. And I'm just here to answer any questions you may have about the process.
I guess my overall question is, I hate to call them complaints, but you do have children in the system that are under ICWA. I don't know if it's fair to ask how many we currently have, or any concerns, complaints that routinely come up, or difficulties. In my understanding, and I guess maybe correct me if I'm wrong, in many cases, if you have an Indian child, and you even want to adopt them, it's unlikely they would go into a guardianship type situation, is, I guess, what I've been told. But is that correct, or any experience in how ICWA has affected Wyoming DFS and how you work within it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At any given time, we have 20 to 30 ICWA cases. And I think something to make very clear is that because of our contractual relationship with Northern Arapaho DFS and Eastern Shoshone DFS, we comply with ICWA through those contracts. In regard to any other child that's not in Hot Springs County, that's not in Fremont County, so basically the rest of the state, that is where we really use the federal law of ICWA. And that is with any tribe. So in any given county, Goshen County, you could have a child that was taken into protective custody. We determine, or it's been disclosed to us, that that child is a member of a different Indian tribe somewhere else. Then we will reach out to that tribe to start the conversation about whether they want to take jurisdiction over that matter. And if that tribe says, yes, we want to take jurisdiction, then we will transfer the jurisdiction to that tribe. It will no longer be heard in district court or juvenile court. So in terms of adoption, that starts to get into what I think part of ICWA is the cultural sensitivities around parenthood, and really a reluctance to terminate parental rights of a parent of an Indian child because of beliefs that really say that is a more of a legal issue, but that through cultural reasons, you can never really terminate a parental right. So that is where it starts to get a little tricky with adoption. And then what we usually do then is suggest guardianship. So the parent that's interested in keeping the child, perhaps a foster parent, if the tribe allows, then guardianship could be entered. It's not the same as adoption, but it has a lot of the same responsibilities.
Further questions for DFS? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards, and I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but with regards to the workload and the caseload and such, is there anything to your knowledge or in your experience that this ICWA is creating like a bog down or a difficulty in the system that would contribute to a detriment to these children? Is there anything, does it work well, or is this creating more difficulties for children? Is it causing them to wait longer to have placement or those types of things?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Penn, speaking to the relationship that Wyoming DFS has with Northern Arapaho DFS and Eastern Shoshone DFS, it's actually a little bit smoother. ICWA really does help us understand our relationship with the tribal entities. So in terms of facilitating transitions, et cetera, that relationship, I think, works well. In terms of maybe the 30 to 40 other cases that are occur at any given time throughout the state, it's a tribe by tribe basis. Different tribes are going to respond in different ways, just as different states would. Jurisdiction issues are always a little bit difficult, regardless if it's because of ICWA or because there's a child from Minnesota.
All right. Yep, Reverend Clouston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question from your perspective. What benefits do you see for this task force being formed?
Go ahead, Director Schmidt.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clouston, so certainly if ICWA is overturned, we are going to need to have some serious conversations about what that means in terms of practice and the relationship between the sovereign and the state, and really in regard to other tribes as well. So it really will facilitate, I think, especially with it being a task force. When it's a legislative body, there really isn't the opportunity for a lot of discourse because of process and procedures. If ICWA is not overturned, I do still see some benefit to it because there are nuances to the federal law that we work through. But I think being able to have a shared understanding between all of the parties, and if necessary, any legislation, this is the body that can really look deeply into ICWA. We've not done that. We've just complied with federal law. We've implemented the best we can. We Certainly over the time, it's been in place since the 70s, so there's been a lot of practice with it, but never really have had an opportunity to have discussions with the tribes and with policymakers about what really is the state's stance on the relationship.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thanks. We'll call you back up if we need you. Any
you.
other agencies here, Mr. Wentland? I guess we'll call you an agency.
Good morning, Chairman Zwanitzer, members of the committee. Kit Wentland, I work as special counsel and then the Tribal Relations Policy Advisor for the governor. I just wanted to come up and say the governor is supportive of participating in this kind of an ICWA task force, especially given the pending Supreme Court decision, whatever it might be. It has been made very clear to us by the tribes that this is something that's central to their identity, to their culture, that's very important to them, and it has been the status quo, and for better or for worse, has worked here in Wyoming. So just to state, the governor's office is happy to participate in this task force in the appointment process, and also in the just state ICWA in general.
Okay, questions for the governor's office? Seeing none. Thanks, Kip.
Thank you.
Mr. McNiven, I'm just guessing you're here to testify on this. Come on down. How many other people want to testify on ICWA, Bill, task force? Okay, we'll wrap it up. And anybody online here to testify on House Bill 19, raise your hand. I'll give that a second. Go ahead, Mr. McNiven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis McNiven, for the record, on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council. Representative Larson has done a fabulous job of laying out the ICWA, what it does. Northern Arapaho is certainly appreciative of all the work that Tribal Relations has done, the ongoing relationship that they have, the Northern Arapaho DFS has with Director Schmidt and her staff and the state DFS. As has been previously mentioned with the Supreme Court, there are three potential, outcomes, right? Uphold the law, could completely overturn ICWA, or they could take some sort of more surgical, nuanced approach to resolving what has been described as the sovereign versus a race, looking at that law. In all three cases, or all three potential outcomes, Northern Arapaho certainly feels there's value, has been spoke about earlier, of having the task force. Also, the timing and the amount of work that needs to be done on this topic. It is not simple. To your question, Mr. Chairman, about keeping it all in-house within just the Tribal Relations Committee, it would take a fair amount of time of the committee's normal 2 to 3 meetings per year, and there would be a lot to look at, and then also the time frame. Should any changes be needed or recommended over the course, the legislature only meets in a pretty short windows, and so to be able to bring any of what recommendations that may come out of the different scenarios doesn't, there's a limited amount of time that bringing the county attorneys, private practice attorneys who specialize in these cases, as well as the departments and representatives from each tribe together, and to have a single focus would be advantageous. And so with that, support the bill. And as has been previously mentioned, there is coincidentally across the hall in the Senate Labor Committee a bill to create a state version of ICWA. And so apologies from some of the council members that they are online over there currently. So with that, support the task amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So maybe the obvious question is, why do we need to study something for 2 years if there's a bill next door that's already coming to us that is working on these issues and codifying them?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to defer to Representative Larson on that. There's, but in of course the timing, that bill, if it was passed, which we hope that it is, the council is very supportive of that bill. But for example, it would more or less stand up a state version of the federal law, correct? And so, for example, if that bill would pass and the Supreme Court would maybe overturn or surgically, or take a more surgical or tactical approach to that, the task force could then, part of their discussion could be and appropriately should be, all right, now in light of the new information and decision from the Supreme Court, how do we further tweak the legislation that was just passed? And we'd already be kind of ahead of the game at that point.
Okay. Further questions for the tribe? You represent both tribes or just the Arapaho?
Just Northern Arapaho, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Question for the Arapaho. Sorry if I've said tribes before and that was not correct. Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Travis. Anybody else here to testify on 19? No one online that I saw. So with that, we will close public comment on House Bill 19. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative O'Hearn. Seconded by Representative Chadwick. Discussion committee. Representative Larson, I should have asked. Any closing comments? Okay. Well, committee on 19, any amendments, any discussion? Representative Ward. You're just gonna have to probably raise your hand because those computers and the Kleenex box block me from seeing when your mic's on, so. Floor is yours.
That's okay. I have a feeling that the tribe probably supports this, and I do support giving freedom to families to be in charge of their own affairs. And so I'm probably a yes on this.
Other comments, discussion? Representative Hornock.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I do see the value of a task force, but my opinion is that we're just slightly jumping the gun. It seems like this would be very effective after we know what the Supreme Court is going to do. And if there's this task force has a limited time frame to it, it seems like this is a big issue that's been happening since 1978. There's a lot of nuances to it. It will take some time to figure out how we want to approach this as a state. Currently, I've heard from testimony that the system seems to be working okay. It's not that there's a giant problem with it at the moment. I just think we're maybe one legislative session too early on this one. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this.
Now, Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think if we're hearing from the tribes that there's a need, this hasn't been looked at in 45 years, and they see a reason that we should do this. I think we should listen to the people that are living the situation. Maybe we can get ahead of any changes or find some things that maybe we can do better for these situations. So I'm in favor of the task force.
Okay, any other comments? Representative Penn.
Given that I represent District 33, which encompasses the Wind River Reservation, and given the information that I have gleaned in the previous Tribal Relations Committee meetings that I've gone back and reviewed on this issue, I do know that even if this federal ICWA law is not overturned, there is still interest from the tribes to have our own state federal rules. There are other states that already have their own ICWA laws, and they, just help the state navigate the system a little bit more. Therefore, I think that it's reasonable to go ahead and proceed with the task force at this time, just because it's, as Mr. McNiven testified, there is a bill across the hall here that's going to address this, and there are a lot of discussions that still need to happen.
Okay, with that, seeing no further comments, if you question being called, Marilyn, call the roll on House Bill 19.
Representative Chadwick. Aye. Representative Clauston.
Aye.
Representative Hornock.
No.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo. Aye. Representative Ward.
Aye.
Representative Yin.
Aye.
Chairman Zwanitzer,
Aye.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
And Representative Larson, you have this on the floor. And I'm going to come talk to you about an amendment. We'll call it a trigger. You know, if nothing changes, if we still need this, I might have that on the floor to figure out why we have two bills both moving through and, yep. All right, with that, next bill up for consideration is House Bill 66, prohibiting mask, vaccine, and testing discrimination, brought by Representative Ward. And you know, I think this is the first time a committee member's had a bill up. So yes, Representative Ward, if you wouldn't mind taking the lower dais for us. And we'll go ahead and invite Representative Bear up to join you, apparently. With that, all right, welcome, Representative Ward. House Bill 66, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bear is joining me since this is my first time presenting a bill, so he's here to help. So first, I'm going to give the philosophical justification, and then I'll go through the bill. So HB 66 eliminates discrimination for not wearing a mask, not receiving a so-called vaccine, or not getting tested. The bill protects individual liberty by requiring that all businesses, public and private, not discriminate against those who refuse to wear a mask, receive a vaccine or so-called vaccine, or get tested. The bill proposes that you cannot be required to wear a mask, get a vaccine, or get tested to work, get an education, go shopping, or be treated at a medical facility. Last year, the Wyoming legislature held a special session to protect our medical freedom with respect to masks and vaccines, and yet was unable to do that. This was a top priority for my constituency. When I walked door to door this election cycle, I promised to protect the individual liberty of my constituents, and I will do my utmost to deliver on that promise. Late this summer, one of my daughters needed a sports physical here, well, in Casper, where I live. We needed it quickly, so we stopped in the community health center. As soon as I walked in the door, they said, "You have to wear a mask." So we were turned away, and I couldn't believe this was still a thing in Wyoming in 2022. The healthcare system has done more to destroy the trust of the American people than any other sector. I am prioritizing the rights of the individual, of we the people. Tyranny by big business or big pharma is one and the same as tyranny by big government. We the people are taking back our liberties. Government exists to protect, first and foremost, individual liberty. Private businesses do not own their customers or their employees. They don't have free rein to abuse us. We're not their slaves. Requiring masks, vaccines, and testing to work, get an education, or be seen by a doctor is a form of discrimination that should be illegal. Businesses, public or private, have no authority to mandate medical interventions, especially those that potentially harm people and/or prevent people from breathing. Our government was formed to protect the rights of we the people, not we the businesses. Part of individual liberty is the freedom to do business without government interference where the government has no authority. The reality is that most businesses, especially small businesses, felt pressure to mandate masks and vaccines, and many did so very grudgingly. They didn't want this at all, and I intend to fight for the business owners who want big government out of their way. I have been told by an opponent of my bill that this will cause Medicaid money to leave our state. And my answer to that argument is that we must make a choice between their dollars and our freedom. Will we sacrifice our freedom for their money? And now I'll go through the provisions of the bill. Page 1 is just a description of what the bill does. Page 2 is definitions, pretty self-explanatory. I call your attention to line 8, where it says public in nature. That means all entities, public and private, in all sectors, education, medical, grocery shopping, etc. That is the intention of this bill. Also in line 21 says public in nature. On page 4, The penalty for breaking this law would be a misdemeanor, $5,000 and 1 year in prison. Willing to discuss that further. And the line 6 is a repealer that also repeals other vaccine requirements, including MMR, polio, and so on. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, committee, questions? Representative Yun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ward, appreciate you bringing the bill so we can have this discussion, because I know, I think you're right. A lot of people want us to have this discussion. I think at odds, and maybe you can help me with this, you argued that you're also protecting small businesses' rights to not have to institute a mandate because they're being pressured by it. But what about small businesses who, let's say you own a bakery and you were at issue that you thought that people would cough on your pastries, and so you wanted people to wear a mask. So I do think that we are talking about restricting one group of people's rights to allow a certain group to do what they want within that private individual's business. So where do you see that push and pull, and what do you think the justification is between restricting one group's rights versus another group's?
Representative Ward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My intention is to protect the rights of individuals, and the intention of this bill, to be clear, is it concerns spreadable disease. So it, in my mind, does not apply to the normal wearing of masks, say, by folks working on roads. That's it. The intention is to protect the rights of the individual with respect to being able to breathe. And I am prioritizing the right of the individual over the right of businesses. And businesses did this grudgingly in my experience with them.
Okay, for the questions, Representative Penn.
When you're talking about private businesses telling an individual that they can't, they have to have these things, just, what am I trying to say here? You're talking about private businesses telling people that they can't enter their business without being vaccinated, without wearing a mask, without testing or something like that. And you're saying that you're trying to protect people from that. Is there a difference between what you're saying and a business's right to say no shoes, no shirt, no service?
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the no shoes, no shirt, no service paradigm has been accepted over decades, and it doesn't interfere with our right to breathe and doesn't potentially harm us. In fact, I think it's probably a good idea to wear shoes when you're walking around outside.
For follow-up? Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. So are you indicating that this is more of a protection of people from businesses requiring medical interventions in order to enter their establishment?
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative Penn, that is correct. The government tried to use businesses as an arm of the state to enforce their mandates, and that's neither right nor fair.
So Representative Ward, has there been any, so this isn't really a new fight in public policy. We've been dealing with this issue when it comes to guns for as long as I've been here. Can a business restrict someone from bringing in a firearm or in their vehicle and on a public park or a school ground, right? So it's always been this kind of, where are we on these issues of personal freedom versus somebody else's freedom to run their business or private business or the government as it sees fit? What happens if there's a business, you have a lot of amendments coming, that actually the right of that small business, couple of employees, one's immunocompromised, et cetera, should that business have the right then to say you must be vaccinated because my employees are at risk? Thoughts on that, or has that conversation come up? There are probably some businesses, maybe in certain parts of the state, who do feel differently and do, would demand people be vaccinated before they enter their facilities. Thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, I'm prioritizing the right of individuals to not have medical interventions required on them to do business and participate in society, to shop, to go to the doctor, to go to school. I just don't think it's fair to require medical interventions that potentially harm individuals for them to participate in society. And by the way, those amendments are potential amendments based on discussion. If any member would like to discuss potential amendments, let me know.
Just make sure I'm clear, medical intervention means a vaccine. That's primarily what we're saying.
Well, that's what you mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's what you mentioned in your question, but I'm referring to mask testing and vaccines.
Further questions are going to be in, and then we'll get into Representative Warnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ward, so I was looking up the repealers, and it appears to be childcare facilities, school vaccination requirements, and then there's a military students compact to assist military families from being able to transfer from school to school. You know, I don't know about funding for, if there's any other federal funding attached for the first two, but the military families one, I'm curious, do you know whether that would impact the flexibility of military families to transfer from school to school in different states?
Representative Ward, if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The repealers' intent are to repeal all vaccines, so polio, MMR in all settings. So I'm willing to discuss that.
Okay, I know we have a lot of public comment ahead, but other questions, Representative Ward, over go on. Representative Warnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question on this is, we're dealing with COVID-19, and has the train already left the station on this? I mean, we did have a special session. I'm curious to get your opinion on how important this is when, well, hopefully COVID's behind us. Maybe it's not, or what do you see in the future? Thanks.
Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought the train had left the station too, except when I went to go get a sports physical for my daughter, and as I walked in the door, I was told I had to wear a mask. It apparently hasn't left the station, and I know that hospitals are still requiring their staff to be vaccinated to work. That should not be happening in a free country.
Okay, further questions, Representative Clausen?
Just curious, have you gathered any information, and maybe somebody else can speak to this, but if you're seeing Medicare patients, right, and you don't follow CMS guidelines, do you lose your funding or your ability to actually treat those patients?
Report if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have heard that argument, and that was the reason for my final comments before I started going through the bill. And that is, I think we need to prioritize our freedom above taking money from the federal government. I think we need to get off the dole of the federal government and stop relying on their dollars.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you know, your comments earlier were about Medicaid, which is partially funded by the state, right? Medicare, which is not, which is our federally funded, you know. My fear here is losing the ability to treat our seniors. A lot of those can't afford any other options besides their Medicare insurance. So nursing homes, hospitals, that would be my concern of this bill.
Wouldn't you agree, as that was a question, I suppose? Go ahead, Representative Ward. if you want.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to let Representative Bear have this one.
Make sure there's no more questions and save that one. And then can I just get a hand count? How many people are here to testify on this? I have 9 online. All right, I'm going to do some math while we call on Representative Penn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually have 2 questions on follow-ups of previous comments. Would you comment, please, on your thoughts on, we're talking about private business and where the role of government is interfering if, on their requirements or what they're allowed. The example was given our local big bakery on Main Street. Do you feel there's any difference in when various businesses were shut down, when the government was choosing winners and losers, I guess you could say, saying these businesses have to shut down, but these businesses, while being private, can remain open, such as Walmart or something like that, especially given the nature of the rural nature of Wyoming. And in a lot of these towns, we may not have a lot of other options. And if the government is saying that these businesses can remain open, whether they're private or whether they're public, I guess I would just be interested in hearing your comments on that issue.
Go ahead, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bill does not cover that issue, but I certainly agree that the government should not be telling us what businesses can stay open and what businesses should close, and I never want to see that happen again. However, that's not addressed in this particular bill.
Everybody good? So just so we're on the same page, it looks like about 25 people with maybe 28 with people online. It looks like 2 more jumped in. We're going to do about 1:30, but I can't stop current elected officials from talking as long as you want. So we're going to go to legislators, but keep in mind, legislators, you're welcome to talk, but the longer you all talk, the less all of Wyoming gets to. So with that, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question, Representative Clouston. We did discuss this at length during the special session in 2021, and I think the best example for what you're describing would be the pushback that you see in other states where they're creating sanctuary city laws and marijuana laws that are in contradiction to the federal laws and pushing back. So yes, there's a potential funding issue, but we don't know what CMS will do until we push back and find out. So this law obviously would create potential conflict with CMS, and we just don't know until we push back. And the point of the Good Representatives bill is to begin that process of pushing back. We don't know the final outcome, and maybe that's something that needs to be discussed. And I think there are amendments that may address that to some extent, but it's a discussion worth having. Thank you.
Okay, questions? And so members up here, we're going to start doing public comment. I know this is the first major bill for many of you with lots of public comment. So if you have a question and you feel like you must ask it publicly to the benefit of all of us, please do. Otherwise, if you can hold your questions till the end or talk offline, that'd be great. So with that, any other legislators here who wish to testify on the bill? Representative Alamant. And I'm going to try to go to 9:40 for public comment, so that gives us 20 minutes. I understand there's 3 amendments on the bill to try to get through this bill today.
Chairman,
So
I'm sorry, do I return to my seat or stay here?
come on back up, Representative Ward. And any other legislator here who wants to talk, just come on forward. Representative Alamand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While walking the streets of Bar None and Midwest, everybody hated the vaccine mandate, I know so many people who were fired from Banner Health because they would not take the vaccine mandate. And my biggest pushback on this bill was, how do we tell a private business what to do? Every day, private businesses are told what to do. First off, my little company, very small company, I collect and send sales tax money to the state. I'm mandated to. If I don't, I go to jail. I am told by the government that me and my employees have to have a hard hat. We have to have glasses. We have to have steel-toed boots and FR clothing. I am mandated so many ways right now by the federal government that I have to have a safety program. I have to have this program. I have to have a drug program. It's all government. It's really not for the people. Representatives Ward's bill is for the people. It's for the citizens of Wyoming. And most bills or most regulations are for the government, for their benefit in tax collection and other things, as I discussed. But this bill, which I am a co-sponsor on, is for the people of House District 58 and for Wyoming citizens. I have just a few statistics. They're very few and I won't bore you with them, but they come from the American Institute for Economic Research. 81,000 drug overdoses was the highest ever in the year 2020. In June of 2020, 40% of the United States reported struggling with mental health. 10.7% in that June had thoughts of suicide, compared to 4.3 in 2018. Between April and October, 31% more emergency rooms visits were by children between ages 12 and 17 for mental health. Travel and tourism fell 92%. 2.1 million started waiting for breast cancer, cervical, or bowel cancer. They could not get in. Chemotherapy decreased 42% and cancer diagnosis fell from 70 to 85%. Murders increased by 14.8%, and the restaurant industry lost a minimum of $240 billion. I am 100% behind this bill. And once again, we are not the only ones who wants to regulate businesses. And this is a very small regulation for businesses. The government, both federal and state, regulate business way more. And this bill is for the people, not the government. Thank you. If there's any questions?
Questions? Seeing none. And so committee, what I'm gonna try to do is do 2 in person, 1 audience, and I'll just keep them rolling. So Ms. Delancey, you're sitting, any other legislator want to speak? Representative Locke, and then
Thank
Ms.
you.
Delancey, if you'd come forward, I assume you're here to testify. And we'll probably start doing row by row. So Mr. Johnson, Ms. Lone, be on deck. Ms. Delancey, welcome. Or Representative Locke, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to urge a yes vote on this bill. And just fairly quickly here, we have a responsibility, of course, we all took the oath to defend the Constitution. And in that, of course, is the individual freedoms that are protected by that Constitution. So taking a quick look at Article 1, Section 38, it's very clear we all have a responsibility, a right, a freedom, if you will, to make our own healthcare decisions. So that's very important that we can include that in this conversation and in this discussion. And and I knew the business freedom would be a hot topic, and of course it is. And we all want to defend the business freedom as well. But I just want to say that we don't want to defend the business freedom, give them the right to, for lack of a better term, to force a medical procedure. Now, one could argue we're not talking about them forcing it. Well, the process of discrimination can be used as for lack of a better term, a bully approach, and is often utilized when the government attempts to mobilize the businesses to do their bidding. So I think we want to be very careful with that and not give that capability. In addition, again, going back to that individual freedom, certainly the individual freedom has to trump that, a business aspect. And another interesting point here is that, individual disclosure, certainly when you talk about vaccine or even testing, what is the right of a business to even ask that question of an individual? That could be probably argued in a very higher level of intensity, if you will, and certainly should be at least in the public conversation. The important thing here is that for the business and the protection of the business, no one's trying to get in the way of the business's right to protect themselves or the individual working in a business to protect themselves in whatever way is appropriate for them. And I think that's what we certainly want to protect that the same way. That includes the individuals that feel like they need these additional protections. We want to make sure that is the case. And the people who want their freedom, for the most part, I know in my case, I was very aware. I'm not saying everyone is, but I was very aware of people who are more concerned. So take the immunosuppressed folks. Certainly they are concerned. And certainly there's a place to make sure we can allow them to protect themselves. But it is important to note that out of respect and care, of course, I'm careful to be cautious around those individuals. But I think it comes down to this. It is still not my responsibility to care for their health.
It's every individual's responsibility to care for their own health. And I don't think we want to cross that line and say, well, I'm doing this for them. No, individuals have to take that responsibility on their own. So I just wanted to urge a yes vote. And I think this is very important and for a robust conversation. Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none. All right, we're going to start minute 30 seconds. Wyoming Business, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. Constitutional law in 90 seconds or less is difficult. I will just reiterate that these discussions had robust time spent on them in our special session. This is a very important topic. I applaud the ability to discuss it again, but I will, remind folks that, we do have a system of laws. Businesses do not want overregulation as far as Wyoming holding itself out as business friendly, and it's not quite as simple as this bill's for the people. Our businesses are the primary revenue generators that power this state. We cannot operate our state without our business community. And the Wyoming Business Alliance does not support any form of legislation that imposes additional regulatory burdens. This bill does exactly that. I want to push back a little bit as far as, that people should just be able to do whatever they want. Businesses are best equipped to make their own operational decisions. We make it all the time, as was referenced. But putting that in the parking lot, because I think we can go back and forth on that, but just really setting this up as far as, the constitutionality of this bill would put our Wyoming businesses in running afoul with the Americans with Disabilities Act, with our OSHA regulations. The real loser in this conversation is the businesses, because businesses don't have the money to litigate, to get fined, to do, everything that this bill would put the businesses directly in running afoul of. So with that, we stand opposed to it, and I'm happy to talk with any of you online on more of the constitutional provisions. Thank you.
And I'll have Representative turn his timer up a little bit louder too. Any questions for the Wyoming Business Alliance? You have a couple. Representative Penn, go ahead.
I'll make it quick. You mentioned that our state can't operate without our businesses, and I would agree. I just have a question. Did you push back when the state was locking down businesses?
Ms. Delancey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Penn. Absolutely. We were pushing back to keep our businesses open. And we were so incredibly grateful for the leadership of Governor Gordon and our 5 elected officials that were able to help us conduct business. And by the way this bill is written, if there were to be another situation, we would never have any option to be able to take a temperature, wear a mask to keep our businesses open. So passing this would really, really preclude any kind of ability to have conversations to keep our businesses open should we ever be faced with a situation like we've been faced with previously. Thank you.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned this bill goes against OSHA and ADA regulations. Can you be specific about how that happens?
Certainly.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the Americans with Disabilities Act. HB 66 would prohibit employers from requiring testing, masking, and vaccination, and protecting immunocompromised employees with disabilities. We have an obligation under the ADA to make accommodations as employers to address those in the workforce that have disabilities, and immunocompromised citizens certainly falls in that category. Moving on to OSHA, employers have an obligation under the OSHA statutes, which are federal statutes. The Supremacy Clause is one of those constitutional provisions that I was speaking of. Article 6, paragraph 2 of the U.S. Constitution is where we refer to our Supremacy Clause. Employers have an obligation under OSHA's General Duty Clause to protect employees from known hazards in the workplace. House Bill 66 would prohibit employers from using 3 medically accepted means to reduce the spread of infectious disease among co-employees. So those are some examples. Representative Hornock, thank you for the question.
Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Delancey, so I heard some testimony from some of the legislators that the business community is being used as an arm of the state. I have previously tried my own attempts at putting some regulations on businesses. Would you agree that the business community is the arm of the state?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Yin. The business community doesn't want to be the arm of anybody. You know, like we want the ability to make choices that are best for our employees and our customers. And that's really, you know, to your question earlier about the push and pull. The pushback that I would give is the consumer has the choice. You know, like the scenario that was given by Representative Ward, if she didn't want to wear a mask to go in to get a service, she can go to another provider. You know, like that's kind of the equalizer, is by giving, you know, Wyoming businesses do not want this legislature to help to dictate to them what their operational decisions should be. We want the ability to make that as private businesses, that we make our livelihood and contribute to the running of the state, that function should solely rest with the business. When the consumer has the option, that right, that choice to go to get services and goods in a way that they see fit. You know, like that's how that compromise comes to place. It's the market that drives that decision. If somebody in Wyoming wants to be too restrictive, they're not going to be in business for very long.
Okay, Representative Ward, do you have a question?
What if there's no other business? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What if there's no other business open to do business with that doesn't require mask, vaccine, et cetera?
Ms. Delancey?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward, you know, other jurisdictions are an option. You know, again, it's the choice that if you do not, I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be an essential service to get a school physical. There's probably other ways to be able to do that. But the bottom line is those choices really, the state is not a one size fits all, and really to eliminate choices for our businesses is just something the business community stands in strong opposition to.
Okay, follow up, Representative Ward?
Quick follow-up. I just want to make sure that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Want to make sure that it's understood. This bill does not prevent people from voluntarily wearing masks, getting vaccinated, or getting tested. It prevents a mandatory requirement of that.
Would you
I want to make sure you understand that.
agree- Or, well, do you understand that, Ms. Delancey?
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I also understand that House Bill 66 would repeal all requirements for immunizations for children and employees in school, child care centers, including longstanding requirements for immunization against diseases such as polio, measles, and mumps. So the whole kind of public health system as we know it would look radically different should this bill pass.
Representative Penn?
To follow up on that, just to be clear and making sure that we understand. So I'm asking, do you understand that the repealer removes the requirement for documentation? It still allows people to get vaccinated. It just doesn't force parents to prove that their child has had every immunization that is required. Do you understand?
Ms. Delancey?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. I've read the bill, and I also understand too that even something as least invasive as a temperature check would be precluded under the current language of the bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delancey. All right, we're going to go in line to Mr. Olmsted. Floor is yours for 1 minute, 30 seconds. Tom?
Thank you, committee chair and members, for the opportunity
We'll
to
go
speak today
to
regarding
Mr.
my
Johnson.
support.
All right, welcome, Tom. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, committee chair and members, for the opportunity to speak today regarding my support for HB 66. An iteration of this bill is absolutely needed.
I don't believe we can hear you. Make
Hello?
sure that's not on our end, LSO.
Hello?
We can't
How about
see your
now?
video or. There you are. All right.
Can you hear me? Do we have audio? Thank you, committee chair
But
and
I don't
members.
believe your
for the op-
microphone's on. Try it one more time for us, or maybe it's our audio. Give us just a
It's your
second.
audio. Do you have audio?
I hear you now.
All right,
All right.
perfect.
Welcome, Tom. Floor is
Thank
yours.
you. Thank you, committee chair and members, for the opportunity to speak today regarding my support for HB 66. An iteration of this bill is absolutely needed to ensure the citizens of Wyoming are not discriminated against due to their personal medical decisions or preference to breathe unobstructed. I wanted to speak a bit to my unique perspective on the topic, as my 25-year aviation career was ended due to mask mandates. Yes, masks, not vaccines, as my principles didn't allow it to even get to that point. As an aviation engineer, I was unable to fly or even work in the office around others. This discrimination was the driving factor in uprooting my family and moving to Wyoming a year and a half ago to raise my children around like-minded and principled communities. My children were homeschooled in 2020 as there was absolutely no way I was going to muzzle my children. In the state we left, there were instances that we were turned away from even buying groceries. Since then, most of the ridiculous narrative has collapsed and been exposed as doing more harm than good. Wyoming has an opportunity to lead, not follow, as the governor did with his mask mandate. I'm sure he regrets it as there was no mention of it in his recent campaign. Wyoming's support of personal freedom must be at the forefront. This bill, though not perfect, needs to move forward as a basic protection for citizens, not to be discriminated against for their faith in God. And that is basically what this is. It is not banning others from doing so, but it is allowing free choice. Again, thank you for your time and consideration in moving this forward, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Perfect on your timing. Questions from Mr. Olmsted? Not seeing any. Tom, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I want to say that I've spent 46 years, a little more than that, in the construction business, and I've had my share of masks and respirators. And every time you put on a mask or respirator, you are taxing your heart harder to suck oxygen through that mask and into your lungs, and your heart and your lungs have to work harder. So I would say that the majority of masks are not worn properly now. If you have a N95 mask, about 95% of those people are not wearing them properly. They have to be sealed around the throat, the mouth, and the nose. So, and that restricts air oxygen going into your bloodstream. So I'm saying that this is a personal choice, a personal freedom to not wear a mask. If somebody requires me to wear a mask in their office or their place of business, they're requiring me to don a medical device. They don't know anything about my being. I would say you're allowed to wear as many masks as you want. If that mask protects you, why do I have to wear one? If your vaccine protects you, why do I have to have it? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Johnson? Seeing none. Ms. Lone, welcome. And then Mr. Brubaker online will be next.
Thank you, Chairman Swanitzer, for allowing me here and representatives. I just want to, first of all, I have a question.
First of all, state your name for the record.
Oh, sorry. My name is Susan Lone, and I'm in House District 411. I'm a private citizen. And my first question I would like to ask is, I'm not sure that, most everybody's talking about businesses, but very little has been announced about schools or house of worship. And my question would be, based on that lawsuit that is in Laramie County, the Grace lawsuit, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't add schools and houses of worship to this, not just assume that it's always businesses. That was my one question. My other question is that when I worked in the medical field and the COVID vaccine became a part of your record, your history. And, we are by HIPAA and laws, you cannot be asking people these questions. So I think that's that's something that has to be looked at. And then the last thing I have is I would like to just say, everybody, I'm at that point where I'm now the senior citizen and the older people. Well, I've taken care of myself. I do the things I need to. I don't believe in vaccines. I don't take them. And I don't need someone telling me that I have to have it. I'll take care of myself and go where I need to go. And so that's why I am in favor of this bill, because I don't need someone running my life. I've done pretty well at 72 years old. So, and I want to keep going. So thank you. That was my comment.
Perfect timing. Questions from Ms. Lone? Representative Ward.
Just a quick comment. The bill,
Make it a question, though.
okay, yes, I will, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure that the commenter, Mrs. Lone, understands that it applies to all areas of public accommodation. That means businesses, churches, schools, medical facilities. I want to make sure, do you understand that?
Ms. Lone, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Swanitzer and Representative Ward. Yes, I did understand that. But I just wondered if it would make the bill stronger by enforcing, or what I'm saying, just by putting that forward, because everybody looks at this as a business, but it's really more than that. And I just would like people to understand that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to go online to Mr. Brubaker. Floor is yours. While he's doing that, anybody in the next row? Boyd, Leo, Sheila, Dr. Chris, come on down. Devin, the floor is yours. Ready to go.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Devin Brubaker, Airport Director, Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport, standing before you representing the Wyoming Airports Coalition. We stand opposed to this legislation. As many of you are aware, airports are subject to many federal regulations, including during the most recent pandemic, the requirement to post signs for mask requirements at our airports. This bill would basically pit airports between complying with state statute or federal regulation, and then would subject our members, our airport directors, to criminal penalties for complying with federal regulation. So at this point, our coalition stands opposed to this bill. We have submitted to you via email this morning a proposed amendment that we believe may address that concern if the committee desires to move this bill forward. But we generally stand opposed to this bill.
Questions for the airports from Mr. Brubaker? I'm not seeing any. Devin, thank you for being here, and we will take up the amendment at the appropriate time, which has apparently been emailed to us, and I will find it. With that, I want to call you superintendent, but Boyd, go ahead.
Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association, Chairman Wanner and committee. Thank you for the work that you do for the state of Wyoming and your dedication. Our concern with the bill is the repealers in Section 2 of Wyoming Statute 214309 and 2424104C that provide for the current required immunizations for children attending school in those records. Currently, the statute provides for opting out of vaccinations for medical and religious reasons to attend schools. As a superintendent of three different districts in my past in Wyoming, I'm not aware of an incident when a medical or religious exemption was not honored when requested. I would ask that you amend page 6, line 6, Wyoming Statute 214-309 and 2124104C repeal out of the bill. They have nothing to do with COVID-19 vaccination or masks. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Questions, Representative Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, would the bill be more palatable to you if we removed the other vaccines if we took out the repealer?
That is our concern with the bill.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you much. Dr. Rose, welcome.
You'd think I've never testified before. Hi, my name is Andrew Rose. I'm a pediatrician at the Cheyenne Children's Clinic and currently the leader of the Wyoming Academy of Pediatrics for the state. And I just come to you as a sort of expert in the field of vaccination. I've currently been in practice for about 10 years, spent quite a bit of time in that space with families discussing a very personal decision about vaccination. And not only that, but 8 or 10 years of education in the medical field that gives a background. I think that that has shown over and over the importance of vaccination. I don't think there are many people in the medical field that would argue how important vaccination has been to our society as a whole. And I find that this bill would very much hinder that for our state and put us sort of back a few centuries. To the extent where if vaccinations are not upheld in schools and other situations where, as we know, children are rampant with germs and love to share those germs, things like polio, which affected children primarily and most severely, would very much be a possibility of coming back. We don't want to see those times. We don't want to see measles coming back. And I think having those requirement for that in schools. And like Mr. Brown just said, there are reasonable ways, and for families who don't tolerate vaccines, that can be upheld. But I just want to tell my opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Dr. Rose? Ms. Ward, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we remove the repealer, would the bill be more palatable to you?
Dr. Rose.
It would be more appealable, yes.
More than current. Representative Hornock.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming. I'm curious, on a high level, what's the typical process to get a vaccine approved?
Dr. Rose, if you know.
Okay. Vaccination approval, goes through many steps, and I won't go through all of them, but after initial research and then testing for, months to years, usually, I think the mRNA vaccines had a little bit of a faster turnaround because they were able to be manufactured faster with that process. The testing through, and sorry, I should say, not testing, but the then authorization through CDC, FDA. We're talking about looking at usually in the category of thousands and hundreds of thousands of participants in these studies that are then, analyzed by experts in the field and cross-tested. I think it's a very rigorous sort of area of research, and I know that there's a lot of doubt in that area, but I think overall vaccines have been proven to be safe by going through that route. But unfortunately, vaccination is inherently a risky thing to do, because what you do is we're purposely making the immune system inflamed to the point where our bodies recognize a pathogen, and that's what you're trying to do. So when you're causing the body to have a fever and causing the body to have a reaction in a way, there's always going to be some risk, and that's unfortunate. But what we do as vaccination specialists is we weigh those risks, and I talk those risks over with families every day, and hope that they make the right choice for public health reasons to protect our entire society and not just be individualistic in this decision. Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Penn?
So you mentioned that you think that immunizations, the theory of immunizations is inherently risky. And you mentioned that it's important for people to make decisions to protect others. Do you support parental choice over the need to, which do you think is more important? Do you think it's more important that a parent has choice, or do you think it's more important that a person is doing something to protect others?
And Dr. Rose, before you answer that, let me just make sure, are you testifying as an individual provider, or are you testifying on behalf of anyone today?
Individual.
Fair question. Go ahead. Thoughts?
So to balance that choice, I think it's an individual. It's going to be an individual family's choice, parents' choice, if that's because obviously parents are making those choices for children, and we as pediatricians have to look at data, look at the reasoning behind making that decision for vaccination for the children, even if the parents may be making that decision for the wrong reasons. And that is where I come from. I come from a specialty that we care for families and parents as well, but my priority is the child's health. And sometimes, unfortunately, parents make decisions that are converse to what is best for that child as well. And we have to weigh that. And I have to balance that, because no, I don't want to kick them out of my practice and never see that child again. But I also want to make sure parents understand appropriate information and not believe all of the misinformation and disinformation that is prevalent in our society right now surrounding vaccines. Thank you.
Okay, for the questions, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up. You mentioned some vaccinations. I'm curious how effective other vaccinations are, like measles, polio, that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Dr. Rose.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hornock. Great question. And each vaccine has a little bit of a different efficacy kind of rate. But when you're talking about, for instance, polio vaccine is highly effective. And it's been proven by the fact that we have nearly eradicated it. Unfortunately, we're still in a global, people can travel globally and bring that back from all sorts of countries that have rampant polio. And so I don't think we are, unfortunately, that close to fully eradicating it. Measles is probably the one that I would be even more concerned about, because of the fact that it's so contagious. Somebody sneezes in an elevator with measles, and 2 hours later, there's still, measles virus that you can pick up. And the vaccine for measles, a live vaccine for measles, is also very effective. There are 2 vaccinations given, typically one when children are 12 months old and another at 4, and it protects for the most part for life, per the testing that's been done.
Further,
Yeah,
Representative Hornock.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, thanks. Was the COVID-19 vaccine on that level of effectiveness as the others?
Dr. Rose, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I don't know the rate, and it depends on the individual COVID vaccines. But I would say that no, the COVID vaccine in general probably didn't have quite as high of a vaccine efficacy rate as a live vaccine like measles. But I can't speak to exactly numbers. Sorry.
Representative Penn?
Thank you, Chairman. In your practice, have you ever made a recommendation to a family based on a protocol or based on your research and your best medical knowledge that has later come to change as more research and more knowledge comes to light?
Dr. Rose?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That is a good question and a difficult one because we are practicing medicine. Indeed, we sort of take the best knowledge that we have and current research and make decisions and help in that partnership with families to make appropriate decisions. One example I can give you is with nut allergies and other allergies when we feed young babies. For quite a long time, pediatricians did tell people to avoid all of these, nuts and fish and all the things. And come to find out about 15, 20 years ago, we probably were doing the wrong thing and we had to reverse what we were saying and came back to say, actually, we should be feeding those foods earlier. And that is what develops sort of a better tolerance of those things. So that has happened, yes, to answer your question.
Okay. Anybody else? Seeing none. Ms. Jobber, welcome.
Welcome.
Jobert, sorry.
Thank you, Representative Van. Good morning, Chairman, Representatives. I'm Jessica Jobert, and I'm here speaking on behalf of myself. As a Wyoming mom and as the Rotary President of the Lunch Club, I'm here to talk in support of vaccines, specifically when it comes to children. Since in the 20th century, it's estimated that 300 to 500 million people died from smallpox. And since 1980, smallpox has been eradicated from the globe due to vaccines. So I just want to speak on the importance of vaccines, especially when it comes to children and our child care facilities and our schools. And I ask you not to move this bill forward. And I'll stand for any questions.
Questions from Ms. Jobber? Representative Ward.
Would it make the bill more palatable to you if we remove the repealer of those vaccines?
Go ahead.
I think it would be a better bill. I still couldn't support it, but I do think, it would be much better to remove those repeals.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jobert, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Do you know how long Rotary International has been working on the polio vaccination around the world?
If you know.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative Yen. I do believe that it has been almost 100 years, and it is a global initiative. And I think the COVID pandemic set us back, particularly in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan that still struggle with the polio disease. But we are making strides, and we are hoping to have it eradicated, in this century. But in New York, just a couple weeks ago, there was a case of polio. Hopefully they're going to contain it. But I mean, it is things that come to the United States, and it is a very important issue.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
And so committee, we still have about 12 people left to testify in 6 minutes. So I guess I'm looking for a sense of the committee. If you still, I'm all for public comment, but just know that pushes everybody's bill down the road. So I'm happy to limit it in 5 minutes, or I'm happy to move the bill till Friday and do nothing but public comment for the next 25. So if I just maybe see a show of hands, all those of you want to continue public comment, raise your hand. Okay, so we're going to hear everybody, still minute 30. If you're here for Representative Larson's bill, we're not going to hear it today. And that being said, we'll try to get through the remaining 12 people. With that, Ms. Dykey, I believe you're up next online. And then Mr. Sniffen, Ms. Shikic, you want to come up? Oh, you've been specifically requested, Ms. Shikic, to come forward by the good gentleman to my left. With that, welcome, Sarah. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sarah Dyke and I live in Lander. And I just wanted to talk about my own personal experience. My husband was refused treatment at Sage West Hospital in Lander because he wouldn't wear a mask. He was in severe pain and he's claustrophobic. And they wouldn't even see him. They said, if you're in that much pain, sir, you'll put on a mask so that we can help you. He ended up having diverticulitis, which can be life-threatening. And from our research, I think it's illegal for hospitals to refuse to at least triage people. But he was refused service because he refused to put on a mask. And then on a separate situation, I am a teacher for the deaf and hard of hearing. And I can say that wearing masks, requiring masks in schools is exceptionally detrimental to the language development and the social development and the education of children with hearing loss. I would argue all children, but certainly with children with hearing loss. And I really hope that this bill passes to prohibit requiring masks because it is bad for people and it is bad for children and it's bad for education. That's all I needed to say. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, have a great day. Mr. Sniffen, you're up next.
Chairman Zwanitzer, members of the committee, I'm Ron Sniffen. I'm with the Wyoming Education Association. WEA is opposed to this bill because of the repeal of the vaccine requirements to attend school. Vaccines are one of the best ways to keep our children safe as well as staff. We need to do all that we can to keep our schools a healthy place to live and learn. Happy to take any questions.
Questions, Representative Ward?
Would it make the bill more palatable to you if we remove the repealer?
That would make it more palatable.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Ron. We're going to go online. Anybody in the next row wants to come up? Mr. Cave, Mr. Boley, come on forward with that. We'll go to Ms. Bieber in Casper.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, my camera is a little weird. I don't want to cause distraction by my freezing camera. My name is Sarah Bieber. I live in Casper, Wyoming. I am a registered nurse here in Casper. I have been for the last 10 years, and I have been in the medical field for 21 years. During the time of COVID, I was a nurse, went through the pandemic. Banner Health Wyoming Medical Center here in Casper went through the process of mandating in July of 2021. I have always had religious and medical exemptions for certain vaccinations. During the time that Banner was mandating, there wasn't a clear process for exemptions. And so I was told to talk to my manager. My manager then told me that exemptions weren't being accepted and that I confirmed with her that my job was literally on the line for that. She confirmed that. In August of 2021, I left Banner Medical Center, started looking for other positions, came across a family practice with the nurse practitioners here in Casper called Platte River Family Practice. Supplied them my resume with my bachelor's degree, my associate's degrees, my experience in the last 21 years.
Go ahead and finish a couple sentences.
Okay. All right. Thank you. She, the only question that came back was whether I was vaccinated. I denied. They didn't offer me exemptions. That has been provided to you in email if you want to see those threads and that information. We are dealing with adults, not children. We are able to make our own medical decisions. I feel like this bill needs to move forward.
Questions for Sarah? Not seeing any. Have a great day. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Mr. Boley, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Eric Boley with the Wyoming Hospital Association and Leading Age Wyoming. I represent all the hospitals and a majority of the nursing homes in the state. And obviously, I spoke with the sponsor of the bill, Representative Ward, on our concerns with this. I understand it's an emotional issue. There's a lot of philosophical things that have gone into our decisions here, but I want to talk about the reality as far as the medical facilities are concerned. We receive our funding from CMS. We receive our rules and regulations. We receive our conditions of participation from CMS, and CMS and the federal government are requiring that all employees are either vaccinated or receive a medical or a religious exemption. There have been hundreds and hundreds of exemptions that have been offered. This has been a learning process for everyone as the mandate was rolled out. If this bill moves forward in its current form, you're putting all of the hospitals, nursing homes, and many other healthcare facilities in the state at jeopardy. And we don't need to push back to understand what will happen, because we're already seeing that. We are under licensure, and we are surveyed by the state agency already to make sure we're in compliance with this. They don't necessarily come out to our facilities to make sure that we are in compliance, but if they're in our facilities, they check to make sure that we're following the CMS rules and regulations.
Good enough? And just making sure this handout is from you?
It was prepared by Mr. Cave here.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, questions for Mr. Boley?
Would it make the bill more palatable if we remove the repealer?
Go ahead, Mr. Boley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward, if you repealed or excluded medical facilities from the bill, it would make it more appealing.
I'm
have a
referring
follow-up?
to the repealer about childhood vaccines. Thank you.
Mr. Boley?
Mr. Chairman, I think it does make the bill better, but we still can't support it in any way.
Representative Trujillo?
You mentioned that there's plenty of exceptions to the rule. How many exceptions have been submitted and how many have been approved?
For all of our hospitals, Representative Trujillo? Or,
In general, right? What's the percentage?
and Mr. Boley, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Trujillo, I just know there are hundreds, and it varies by facility. I heard one facility had given 143, and it depends on the size of the facility. Some facilities have 2,000 employees, some have 100 employees. And
Follow-up, go ahead.
Is there a place we can get those numbers for the state of Wyoming? I'd like to see how many have been submitted, rejected, and approved.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Boley.
Representative Trujillo, I don't know if that's available in any database. You could probably contact each facility directly and ask for that information. We do have to report our vaccination rates and the exemptions to CMS though. But I don't know if, I'm not sure if it's kept. I know the state's here and they might know more about the database that we're required to report to.
Okay. But maybe if it is possible for a quick informal poll of your members or any of our larger facilities, just to get an idea. I think I have an idea of what it is in my community, but I don't want to speak for them. So, but if that's a possibility by our Friday meeting to get a rough idea, that would be appreciated. Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that you have to operate under CMS rules. Does CMS require your employees and others to be fully vaccinated and masked?
Mr. Boley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornock, they are required to be vaccinated. That is a requirement under CMS. And if we do not adhere to that, they can withhold our payments. Our nursing homes can be fined with civil monetary penalties, and eventually we could lose the ability to admit patients. As far as masking is concerned, we've been following the guidance and it's changed over time. We were heavily masking to begin with. We've seen the need for masking decrease, but there's still guidance out there that we are required to follow under CDC and CMS guidance.
Representative Hornock, follow-up?
Yeah, just to follow up. So it's required for vaccinations. Is there a way to, is there a mechanism in place to get those exemptions still? Or is it just, nope, you've got to be vaccinated, or are there allowable exemptions within that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornick, there are still exemptions available. Matter of fact, in another setting in my life, I'm clergy, and I actually signed a religious exemption the other day for someone that just started working at a nursing home.
Okay. Representative Yin, do you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Mr. Boley, let's assume that the bill passes as is. How do you have a sense of how much federal funding the state would have to replace if it wanted to keep the same level of care in its hospitals today?
Mr. Boley.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yan, I think it's a great question. I believe that the Medicaid budget alone is $750 million almost annually. Obviously, we receive a 50% match of federal funds for every dollar we put in, we get a dollar back in most cases. Our payer mixes in our facilities, just to give you a sense, and I shared this with Representative Ward yesterday, our nursing homes are roughly 70% Medicaid patients. Our payer mixes in all of our settings, we receive governmental payments in our hospitals somewhere between 55 and 65% is our government payers sources. So it's a huge percentage. And I guess what I would offer is if we want to move this bill forward and we want to push back on the federal government, we think that's where we need to be, then I would ask you to amend the bill and put the state on the hook for anything that we lose as far as revenue and penalties that are levied against our facilities.
Further questions? Mr. Boley, not seeing any. Mr. Cave, and then after, you do have a question? Go ahead, Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Chairman. Any idea when you say the state would be on the hook? Any idea what that total amount would be? I mean, I'm thinking we're in the billions.
Mr. Boley?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clouston, it would be a staggering amount. It'd be well over $1 billion. If all of our facilities fell out of compliance and they were not allowed to receive any federal, and in reality, it's not really a good fix because we have to be able to treat patients. We talk about people's rights and delivering care. I have to protect the hospitals. I have to protect the nursing homes, but in essence, I'm protecting the citizens of Wyoming. We have to be able to treat them, and we can't do that if we don't have medical facilities.
Okay. Yep, Reverend O'Hearn, have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any way to delineate out the repealers that Representative Ward is talking about the historical vaccinations we know really, really work? If I were to get vaccine, would I not be able to have to wear a mask? Because I heard a couple of people say the mask is the main problem. Going into a facility or going out or just getting treated. So if I get a vaccine for the main historical things, don't do anything with COVID, do I have to wear a mask? Can I get an exemption for that?
Mr.
Does that make it? My question was, if I get vaccinated at a hospital, do I have to wear a mask if I've been vaccinated?
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, is that the COVID vaccine? So, Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, it's most of our facilities have really loosened their masking requirement, and there are a lot of our facilities don't require masking anymore. Others are requiring masking in general areas just to protect the public, but then they're able to remove those masks in a lot of other areas. I think the other interesting part, so I think if you have the vaccine, obviously, it's kind of like with the flu vaccine that we have in our facilities. If you're vaccinated against the flu, you don't have to wear a mask, but if you refuse to have the flu vaccine, then you have to wear a mask. That's been a longstanding practice in many of our facilities. I think the other thing I would just offer as far as masking, masks have proven to be effective in many, many settings in healthcare. Surgeons have worn masks, actually PPE, for years to protect the patient as they deliver care to them. When we're compounding drugs, our pharmacists wear masks to make sure. With this, I think what we're saying is they wouldn't be allowed to wear masks for any of the duties that they've done, and that we've proven that masks work in our facilities for 100 years or more.
Okay. Mr. Cave, and then we'll go online to Ms. Pulley. Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brad Cave. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Holland and Hart. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Hospital Association and Leading Age as well. A huge part of my practice is counseling employers on complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and to a lesser extent, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. I am here to tell you that House Bill 66, if it's passed in its current form, will likely be rendered unconstitutional by the federal court system. Last month, a Montana federal judge threw out a Montana statute that prohibited healthcare employers from requiring their employees to be vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. The federal judge found that that statute violated the Supremacy Clause on 3 different grounds. First, the Americans with Disabilities Act preempted that statute. The OSHA Act preempted that statute, and the CMS interim final rule that you've been hearing about this morning preempted that statute under the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. This bill will immediately be challenged. It will have to be because of some of the concerns that Mr. Boley shared with you. And there is good reason to believe that it is subject to the Supremacy Clause unconstitutionality as well. The Americans with Disabilities Act concerns apply to all employers, not just healthcare employers. If you have an immunocompromised employee, you are required by law to accommodate that person so they can continue to work in your facility. And in situations involving infectious diseases, the most accessible accommodation for employers is either masking or testing of some variety. Vaccination, most employers don't want to require their employees to be vaccinated. It's invasive and it doesn't really, employers push back on it. I've worked with lots of employers trying to help them with that. So this bill will get in the way of compliance on a variety of levels for every employer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions for Mr. Cave? And maybe just for the record, Mr. Boley on behalf of the Hospital Association, Mr. Cave on behalf of New Age. That way I don't give anybody 2 bites at the apple, just to be fair. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go online to Ms. Poley. Floor is yours. We're going to get Mr. Porter online after that and then see who's, I have a couple more online. We'll move till Friday and we'll see who's left after that. So Ms. Poley, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. April Poley, Buffalo, House District 40. I feel like this bill is an all-encompassing rehash of the 2021 special session, and it's just far too much in one very short bill, actually. It's just so broad. It needs an axe taken to it greatly. I would like to suggest
Ms. Poley, I think you accidentally muted yourself. Oh.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
I can't hear you now.
Well, we can hear you, so if you keep talking, we'll be good.
There, now I hear you.
All right, continue.
Okay, start over or?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what you heard or didn't hear.
Start from the beginning.
Okay, April Poley, Buffalo, House District 40. In a nutshell, I just wanted to suggest that you really take a hatchet to this bill. Even with as short as it is, it's extremely all-encompassing with reference to vaccinations broadly, not just limiting to COVID-19 vaccinations, but also referencing masking. And I think you can see that by the testimony. People are either focusing on the masking or they're focusing on the vaccinations, and they're focusing on vaccinations all-encompassing for schools where you're talking about measles and mumps and rubella, or they're talking about COVID-19. I just feel like there's a lot of chance for things to just slip in without as much scrutiny because this bill is so broad. I did send an email to some of you on the committee who I know are not sponsors of this bill with regards to what I feel are infringements on personal business owners. I think most of us realize that most business owners in Wyoming are sole proprietors, and threatening them with financial hardship and going to jail because maybe a business owner is immune compromised and has a fear, mind you, brought on by government and media. I hear the beep.
Yeah. Let me ask if there's any questions from Ms. Poley. Not seeing any, April. Thank you for joining us from Buffalo.
Thank you.
Mr. Porter, floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your time this morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Very good. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I've appreciated the conversation today about the reliance on government payers and funding. And regardless
of for us, just where you're from. And if you're
I'm sorry, Lance Porter, I'm the CEO of Wyoming Medical Center in Casper, Wyoming. So regardless of where you stand on whether we should be reliant on government payers or not, the fact of the matter is every hospital in the state of Wyoming relies on them significantly. To put that in perspective, here at Wyoming Medical Center, 45% of the patients that come through our doors are Medicare recipients. Another 10% are Medicaid. So the passing of this bill would put over half of our revenue at risk. revenue that's necessary to pay our nurses, pay our doctors, and continue to provide the care for the patients that need it. There's not a hospital in Wyoming that would survive losing their Medicare and Medicaid funding. The other point I'd like to make is hospitals have a long history of requiring vaccinations and masking in a variety of environments and for a variety of reasons. And that's for two reasons. One, it keeps our patients safe. You have a nurse that deals with dozens of patients in one day. You want to make sure that they're not a carrier of a deadly disease and passing that on to somebody who's already sick. And likewise, it protects our staff. We deal day in and day out with sick people. We need to do what we can to keep our staff safe, because if our staff gets sick, they're not there to be in the fight. And that's all I have to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions? Representative Hornock has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there was some questions earlier. I'm curious to get your thoughts right now about the exemptions. Do you have an idea of how many exemptions have been filed with your hospital and how many you have approved? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Hornock. We approved over 100 exemptions. We had two different exemptions. We had a medical exemption as well as a religious. The medical one was pretty stringent, but the religious exemption, there was not a single religious exemption that was denied.
Okay, any further questions?
Everybody who applied for one received one.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. All right, committee, we're going to hold 4 people online over for public comment till Friday. Anybody who's here today who didn't get to comment, just raise your hand if you wanted to, and I didn't get to you. Maybe the Department of Health. Oh, Carolyn, hi. All right, 2 of you on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. If you're able, we'll continue the discussion then. For now, we are adjourned until Friday morning. And I'll still have 2 more bills after this on Friday morning and optimistically get through them all.